In his prison letters to his twisted fans, he writes, and let me quote him, God has forgiven me. God has separated me from my sin as far as the east is from the west. The hard part, he says, was forgiving himself. But there's good news on that front, too, because Watts writes, I am finally at peace. Good for you. Joined now by the reporter who obtained these gems exclusively. Steve Helling is the U.S. senior reporter for the Daily Mail. You always get the goods, my friend. It's just so cringe, isn't it, reading his words?
I mean, we've read his words before, and he doesn't change his tune. It's just always just a little bit different than the last time, but it's the same song. God has forgiven me. I've forgiven myself. It's not my fault. The girl made me do it. There's always something that he likes to say.
Yeah, he loves to suggest that he's in good standing. Let me read some of the Bible verse that he uses to justify his thinking. He says this, I am a new man. I am not the person who committed those horrible acts. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. That's me. I'm a new creature. I'll agree with him there. He is a creature. Your thoughts about just this, profuse baloney when it comes to how God loves him?
Well, it's really a perversion of Scripture, if you really want to get down to it. Yes, the Bible says that, but it doesn't mean that you don't suffer the consequences of what you did while you're here on earth. It doesn't mean that you're somehow innocent. That's not what it means. Sure, if he's sorry about it, great. But, what he's trying to say is that basically God has forgiven me. I've forgiven myself. Everything's hunky-dory. And that's just not how the world works.
Right. Here's another quote that you got from his letters in April. He said, and this is rich, I have always taken full responsibility for what I did, even though I was misled by a wicked woman. And he's referring to Nicole Kessinger, the woman he was having an affair with, who, as I recall, had no idea he was married, but saw the headlines that this guy she's dating has a family who's suddenly missing, and she went right to the police.
Right, exactly. And, he pulls, it's kind of like the Adam and Eve defense. Like when, he's like, it was the woman, she's the one who did it. Which, at one point he had even blamed Shanann for killing the girls, and then he killed her in retaliation. His story changes all the time, but it's really interesting that it's always somebody else's fault, and that somebody else is always a woman. That's what it seems to be.
I think he's right where he needs to be, but Steve Helling, you and I should just look straight into the camera and tell all the ladies out there, if you think you're having an exclusive relationship with your pen pal, Chris Watts, he's cheating on you like he cheated on his wife. And God, thank the Lord that he is locked up and that you are not at least going to hopefully suffer what she did. Hey, Steve Helling, good to have you. Great reporting, as always. Thank you for this.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Welcome to Dark Matters, True Crime, the channel where every case drags you deeper into the unknown. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we explore the darkest corners of the human mind.
For years, the story of Chris Watts seemed closed. The man who once appeared to be a quiet family father was now serving multiple life sentences in prison for the murders of his pregnant wife, Shanann Watts, and their two young daughters, Bella Watts and Celeste Watts. But in early 2026, something unexpected surfaced. A collection of private prison letters Chris Watts allegedly wrote from inside his cell, began circulating online. These letters were never supposed to be public. According to people who claim to have seen them, Watts had written them over several years while serving his sentence at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. The contents shocked many followers of the case. Some letters were described as reflective, others were disturbing, but what caught everyone's attention was one particular section that hinted at a secret Chris Watts had never spoken about publicly before. For years, Investigators believed the motive behind the crime centered on his affair with Nicole Kessinger and his desire to start a new life. Watts himself had admitted to the murders during the investigation in Frederick, Colorado back in 2018. But the leaked letters suggested there was more happening in his mind than anyone realized at the time. In one passage, reportedly written late at night inside his prison cell, Watts described memories that continued to haunt him. He wrote about the moment everything changed, and about thoughts he claimed he had never fully explained to investigators. Those who read the letters said something felt different about them. Not because Chris Watts was confessing again, but because he seemed to be slowly revealing pieces of the truth he once tried to hide. And if the letters were real, they might reopen questions many people thought had already been answered. The question now was simple. What exactly was the secret Chris Watts had tried to bury for years? And why was it coming out now? To hear the next chapter of this story, make sure you like and subscribe to Dark Matters True Crime. When the alleged prison letters connected to Chris Watts began circulating in 2026, many people were skeptical. After all, the case had already been investigated thoroughly, and Watts was serving multiple life sentences for the murders of his pregnant wife, Shanann Watts, and their daughters, Bella Watts and Celeste Watts. But the first letter immediately caught attention. It was reportedly written several years after Watts was transferred to Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. The tone of the letter was calm, almost reflective, but the words inside hinted at something deeper. According to those who claim to have seen it, Watts began by describing his daily routine in prison. He wrote about the long, quiet hours in his cell and the constant feeling of isolation. At first, the letter sounded like something many inmates might write, reflections on regret, time, and the past. But then the message shifted. Watts reportedly wrote about the night before everything happened in Frederick, Colorado in 2018. He described the tension inside the house and how things had been building for weeks. He hinted that his thoughts had become darker and more confusing during that period. One line in the letter stood out. Watts wrote that people believed they already understood his motive, but he claimed that the reality inside his mind had been more complicated than what investigators or the public ever saw. He didn't explain the secret directly. Instead, he wrote that there were parts of the story he had never found the courage to say out loud. That single sentence was enough to spark intense discussion online. Many people who followed the case began asking the same question again. Was Chris Watts finally preparing to reveal something new? Or was this just another attempt to control the narrative of a crime that had already shocked the world? Either way, the first letter had reopened the mystery. And according to those who had access to the full collection, the next letters would become even more unsettling.
So she just found out she was pregnant?
Yes.
Oh, she called us and told us
Okay.
that she was pregnant again. And it's something that, with her health, she had problems with Bella, she had problems with Celeste, and we were worried about her health. Now, I understand you want to try to have a boy, but we're worried about your health before you have another baby. And they were trying, from what we were told, they were trying to have another baby. And then when she was pregnant, she had, every time she was pregnant, she did something big for Chris. This surprise, go upstairs and read this, and she had shirts made for everybody. Said, we're expecting it or something like that. It said, and he came walking in the house because she had on video. She's got to have 6,000 videos and pictures on her phone. And you see him come in. He was all excited and everything else, and I don't know. And then that Monday when she came back, she told Chris had told us that she had a sealed letter. So he told her, this was enough, because we kept asking Shanann, what is it? What is it? I don't know yet, Dad. I don't know yet. And we know she went to the doctor before she left. She said, I don't know. And then he said that she had a sealed envelope or a sealed letter from the doctor's office telling them what the sex was of the baby. So I never got to see that in her.
So you know who prompted the having a third child? Was that her idea? Was he pushing for it? Do you know?
They were trying to have a boy. He wanted to have a boy.
Okay.
Even though Celeste was a tomboy.
Yeah.
She was a...
When was the last time you talked to Shanann?
Before she left. I can look at my phone and tell you exactly.
Before she left for
Arizona.
Okay.
And then I just texted her, told her to have a safe trip back, and
how often would you talk to her?
every day.
Every day?
Every day we'd FaceTime. Didn't miss a day. If I missed a day, I was going crazy without seeing them kids.
But that's when she was at home? Is that what you said?
I FaceTimed them even when Chris was there. So if she wasn't there, I still FaceTimed.
Okay.
Yeah, I FaceTimed almost every night unless I got home late from work and the babies were sleeping.
Okay. But you didn't talk to Shanann when she was on trips, generally?
Some we just text.
Okay.
As more of the alleged prison letters from Chris Watts surfaced in 2026, people following the case began noticing something unsettling. The tone of the letters slowly changed. What began as quiet reflection in the first message soon turned into something deeper and darker. In the third letter, Watts reportedly wrote more directly about the days leading up to the tragedy in Frederick, Colorado in 2018. For years, the public had heard about his affair with Nicole Kessinger and the financial stress that surrounded his marriage with Shanann Watts. Investigators believed those factors played a major role in the crime. But in this letter, Watts suggested there had been another struggle happening inside his mind. He wrote about feeling trapped between two lives. One was the life he had built with his family, including his daughters Bella Watts and Celeste Watts. The other was the future he imagined for himself, one that he believed could only exist if everything from his past disappeared. According to those who reviewed the letter, Watts described nights when he could barely sleep. He wrote about staring at the ceiling in the dark, thinking about decisions that he knew could never be undone. One passage stood out more than the rest. Watts reportedly wrote that the world believed the crime happened suddenly, but he hinted that the thoughts behind it had been forming long before anyone realized. He didn't clearly explain what those thoughts were. Instead, he suggested that he had been hiding something deeper about his state of mind during that time. For readers of the leaked letters, that single suggestion created even more questions. If the crime had not been a sudden decision, then what exactly had been building inside Chris Watts before that night? And more importantly, what was the secret he still hadn't fully revealed?
Like I said, I never really bothered her when they were out. I mean, she'd take pictures of everybody and she'd be on, live and do all that. I usually never bothered her when she was there. I'd text her and how you doing? Is everything all right?
Okay. But you'd FaceTime every day to talk to the kids?
Every day to talk to the kids.
Okay. Even if she wasn't there?
Even if she wasn't there. Like I said, that Sunday I did call. We did FaceTime them and they were, I asked Chris how everything going good. Bella said something about mommy coming home. He said, yeah, she's not coming home till midnight and she'll be home tomorrow. And
do you remember what time on Sunday you FaceTimed?
They were eating dinner, so it had to be about 7 o'clock our time.
7 o'clock?
North Carolina time. Because they usually eat around 5 o'clock, and Shanann is kids eat at this time. Even when they came out North Carolina, I said, Shanann, you got to give them a little bit of break because it's different time now.
Right.
So now you're giving them food at 3 o'clock, and they're used to being eating at 5 o'clock. So you got to give them a little bit of break. So yeah, she was. Kids took naps at 12 o'clock every day. She had them on a great schedule. They did it.
And nothing out of the ordinary on the FaceTime on
No,
Sunday.
it didn't. Chris is Chris. I mean, did nothing. Nothing ever gave me any kind of a thing that there was a problem with at that house.
What did you think when you first heard that people couldn't get a hold of Shanann?
Well, when Sandy said she couldn't get a hold of Shanann, it didn't. I mean, it's because I know sometimes Shannon's like, "Mom, just leave me alone." She doesn't do it. But sometimes if Sandy couldn't get a hold of her, she'd say, "Can you text her and find out what's going on?" Shanann would answer pretty much me all the time. So she never called me. When I found out she was missing, and then before I even knew about the truck, and they said her phone was in there, I told them right away there's something wrong. And then she said the front door had the security lock on it because I put one on there when I was out there. Something similar to these, we put the latch on so the girls open the door, they can't get out. And I put one on there, and I put one on the garage door.
Do you know, did they usually leave those engaged, or?
I had that question already. Shanann, if she got home late like that, she may do it. Shanann did it.
As the alleged prison letters from Chris Watts continued to circulate in 2026, one message stood out more than the rest. According to those who claimed to have seen the full collection, the fourth letter was the moment where Watts finally began to hint at the secret he had supposedly tried to bury for years. By this point, Watts had already written about his life inside Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, and about the tension that existed in the weeks leading up to the tragedy in Frederick, Colorado in 2018. But in this letter, the focus shifted completely. Watts reportedly wrote that the public believed they already understood his motive. Most people pointed to his affair with Nicole Kessinger as the main reason behind what happened. Others believed financial pressure, and the breakdown of his marriage with Shanann Watts played the biggest role. But in the letter, Watts suggested there was another part of the story that he had never fully admitted. He wrote that during the final weeks before the crime, his thoughts had become more intense and more chaotic. According to the letter, he began feeling as though his entire life was collapsing at once. The pressure from his personal life, his relationship problems, and the fear of losing everything had begun to overwhelm him. Then came the line that shocked many readers. Watts reportedly wrote that he had convinced himself that there was only one way to escape the life he felt trapped inside. He didn't immediately explain what he meant by that statement. Instead, he wrote that at the time, he believed he could somehow start over if the past disappeared. It was a chilling thought. And for people reading the leaked letters, it felt like the moment when the truth behind his mindset was finally beginning to show. But the next letter would reveal something even more disturbing. For the next chapter of this story, make sure you like and subscribe to Dark Matters True Crime.
It's made by the victims in this case. The court's going to find that the plea agreement is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. I want to acknowledge the Rusick family as well as the Watts family that showing mercy on Mr. Watts is understood, and I respect that decision to request that the district attorney not seek the death penalty in this case. And so the court is going to accept this plea bargain under the circumstances. Words that come to mind when I hear the evidence in this case are a senseless crime and the viciousness of the crime. And equally aggravating in this court's determination is the despicable act of disposing of the bodies in the manner in which they were done in this case. I've been a judicial officer now for starting my 17th year, and I could.
By the time readers reached the fifth alleged prison letter from Chris Watts, the tone had become far more disturbing. The earlier letters hinted at regret and confusion, but this one focused directly on the final hours before the tragedy that shocked the world. Watts reportedly began the letter by writing about the quiet night inside his home in Frederick, Colorado in 2018. According to the account, he described the house as unusually silent. His wife, Shanann Watts, had just returned from a business trip, and the tension between them had been growing for weeks. In the letter, Watts claimed his thoughts were racing that night. He wrote that he felt like his life had reached a point where everything was closing in on him at once. His marriage was falling apart. His secret relationship with Nicole Kessinger was becoming more serious, and he feared that the truth about his double life would soon come out. According to those who reviewed the letter, Watts wrote that he barely slept that night. He said he kept replaying different futures in his mind, imagining what his life would look like if things continued the way they were. One passage reportedly stood out to readers. Watts wrote that he had convinced himself the next morning would determine the rest of his life. He hinted that he believed a single decision could erase the chaos that surrounded him. But what made the letter unsettling was the way he described his thinking at the time. He reportedly admitted that instead of facing the consequences of his actions, he had begun imagining a completely different path. One where the life he built with Shanann and their daughters Bella Watts and Celeste Watts no longer existed. For many readers, this letter revealed something chilling. It showed how deeply disconnected his thinking had become before that night. And according to those who claimed to have seen the final letters, the next one would reveal the moment when everything finally crossed the line. The sixth alleged prison letter from Chris Watts was described by many readers as the most disturbing so far. While the earlier letters focused on pressure and confusion, this one reportedly revealed the moment when Watts began realizing the weight of what he had done. According to those who reviewed the letter, Watts wrote about the hours immediately after the tragedy in Frederick, Colorado in 2018. The house that once held his family had suddenly become silent in a way that he had never experienced before. In the letter, Watts claimed that during those moments, reality began to hit him in a way he had not expected. He reportedly described walking through the house and noticing how empty everything felt. The toys belonging to his daughters, Bella Watts and Celeste Watts, were still scattered around the rooms. Their small shoes sat near the door, exactly where they had been left the night before. Watts wrote that seeing those ordinary details made something inside him shift. For the first time, he began to realize that the life he once had with his wife, Shanann Watts, was truly gone. The future he thought he was creating suddenly felt empty and meaningless. According to the letter, he remembered sitting alone in the house and feeling a wave of panic. The reality of what had happened could no longer be pushed away or ignored. One part of the letter, reportedly, revealed a chilling realization. Watts wrote that he had believed removing his past would somehow give him freedom, but instead, he claimed it left him with something far worse, a silence that he could never escape. For many people who read the leaked letters, this moment was the clearest glimpse into the mind of a man who had finally begun confronting the consequences of his actions. But the final letters suggested there was still one more secret he had not fully explained. If you want to hear the final chapters of this story, make sure you like and subscribe to Dark Matters True Crime. By the time readers reached the seventh alleged prison letter from Chris Watts, the tone had shifted once again. The earlier letters spoke about pressure, regret, and the silence that followed the tragedy. But this letter reportedly came closer than ever to revealing the secret Watts had hinted at from the beginning. Writing from Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, Watts described the long years he had spent thinking about the choices that destroyed his life and the lives of his family. He wrote about the public's perception of the case in Frederick, Colorado in 2018. Most people believed they already understood what had happened. They pointed to his affair with Nicole Kessinger, the tension in his marriage with Shanann Watts, and the pressure building in his personal life. But according to the letter, Watts claimed there was another truth he had struggled to admit. He wrote that during the weeks before the tragedy, he had begun mentally distancing himself from the life he had built. Instead of confronting his problems, he admitted that he started imagining a version of the future where everything connected to his past simply disappeared. What made this confession unsettling was how clearly he described that mental shift. Watts reportedly wrote that he had convinced himself that his family was standing between him and the life he thought he wanted. That belief, he claimed, slowly took control of his thinking. According to readers, this was the closest he had ever come to explaining the mindset behind his actions. It was not a sudden moment of anger. It was a gradual change in the way he saw his own family. And as chilling as that admission was, the final letter would reveal the realization that now follows him every single day inside prison. The final alleged prison letter from Chris Watts was described by many readers as the most haunting of all. Unlike the earlier letters that hinted at secrets and hidden thoughts, this one reportedly focused on the reality Watts now faces every day inside Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. According to those who claim to have read it, Watts began the letter by writing about time. He explained that prison forces a person to sit with their thoughts for hours, days, and years without distraction. For him, that meant constantly remembering the life he once had in Frederick, Colorado. He reportedly wrote about the ordinary memories that now returned to him the most. The laughter of his daughters, Bella Watts and Celeste Watts, playing around the house. The everyday conversations with his wife, Shanann Watts, that once seemed small but now feel impossible to forget. In the letter, Watts claimed those memories are the hardest part of his punishment. He wrote that when he made the choices that destroyed his family, he believed he was escaping a life that felt overwhelming. But according to the letter, the reality turned out to be the opposite. Instead of escaping his past, he now lives with it every single day. One passage reportedly captured the feeling he described best. Watts wrote that prison walls can block a person from the outside world, but they cannot block the memories of the people who are gone.
A maximum sentence would be appropriate, and anything less than the maximum sentence would depreciate the seriousness of this offense. So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed, with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole.
For readers who followed the case for years, the final letter felt like the closing of a long and tragic story. Not because the mystery disappeared, but because the consequences of that night will never truly end. And for Chris Watts, the truth he once tried to bury is now something he must face for the rest of his life. If you found this story powerful and revealing, make sure you like and subscribe to Dark Matters True Crime for more true crime stories.